All right, well, good morning. We are getting a little set up here still. Sorry for that. Little difference. We're together again, not doing remotely. We have a special guest coming here shortly as well. So,
good morning, everybody.
Not in studio, but close.
Hey, it's a good feeling. Definitely glad to be out, not in two different spaces. We're in our new podcast room where we will actually start streaming all of the shows for 2023. So definitely thank you for tuning in. We got a good show today, a lot of good notes that we're going to cover, some great news in the cannabis space. So thank you for tuning in.
And one of the great things about this is now we can actually once again go back to IG.
Setting that up right now.
All right. Well, good morning, Lucy. Can you hear us? We are live now. We are all set up.
I can hear you.
You're here.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
So for those who are watching us stream here online, of course, we have Sam here with us in person, and Lucian, and we're going to get to it just a little bit, but Lucian, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your company. We'll dive into it again shortly.
Yeah, well, my name's Lucian Edisford. I've been working with SnapFan, a company I founded for about 15 years. I've just merged with a company out of Chandler, Arizona called FogCO. They've been, since 1989, been making high-pressure fog mist systems used for cooling, humidification, special effects, and also they have a proprietary system of doing odor control, which has been pretty popular recently. And then with the SnapFan line, we do solar-powered ventilation. We do very efficient ventilation for different types of agricultural businesses. And we pioneered a thing we're calling crop-level airflow. Efficient ventilation for different types of agricultural businesses. And we pioneered
accessibility shortcuts. We got a slight delay right here, Lucian, just for a second.
Video description box, menu screen, disable.
We pioneered
Accessibility shortcuts.
There.
All right. So Lucian, when you're saying from the crop, you were just speaking about the crops?
Yes, yeah, we're talking about a thing called crop level airflow. We move the air just at the right speed across the plant leaf to increase the photosynthesis.
Oh, wonderful. And then does that affect the genetic size of the actual leaf itself?
No, I mean, the genetic size is going to be pretty stable based upon the plant's genetics and then the amount of nutrients it's getting and things like that. What we're looking at is on the bottom of a leaf, there's a small gland called a stomata. And the stomata's there and formed, what they do is they absorb a CO2 molecule. So when the plant is photosynthesizing, it takes in a CO2 molecule and then it lets out hydrogens, oxygens that form H2O, water. The water cools the leaf, and then the plant is allowed to bring in more water through the root. So there's a function of water coming up through the root, coming through the plant, transpiring through the leaf, and sort of in a simultaneous fashion, the CO2 molecules need to go back into the leaf so the plant can photosynthesize. If the wind speed is too strong at the plant level, then the plant starts to transpire too much, which would be like the equivalent in a human of us sweating too much. The plant could start losing moisture, in which case they close down the stomata. There's a thing called guard cells, and the stomata closes. When the stomata is closed, it stops the plant from losing moisture, but it also means that the plant cannot photosynthesize because CO2s can't go in through the stomata. So if we get the wind speed right, the plant will be able to photosynthesize. Conversely, we just talked about a scenario where there's too much wind. If there's too little wind, so the wind is across the bottom of the leaf is less than, say, 0.02 of a meter, then the stomata close or become inactive because the hydrogens and oxygens have left the leaf and they've come out of the stomata but because they haven't been moved away, they cause what's called a high pressure zone. So we get these little hydrogens and oxygen molecules have coalesced around the stomata, meaning that a CO2 molecule can't penetrate and get into the leaf. So in that case, the plant sits there and does not photosynthesize.
And that photosynthesis, it directly correlates with the THC level in the plant.
Well, in some regard, the THC is a oil that the plant is producing. But in order for the plant to produce oils or to grow, plant matter, whether that's structural leaves, structural biomass in its stems, or be able to even interface with the mycorrhizomes, it has to be absorbing CO2s, and that goes for all plants, whether it's lavender or spinach or a tree, they all have to photosynthesize in order to do their job.
Okay, sounds great. So the overall healthiness of the plant, you've perfected that process so that way the plant goes into full stalk.
Yeah, what we do is we allow there's a lot of elements going into growing, right? And one of them, there's light and there's water and there's nutrients and there's temperature and things like that. So if you get it all right, you will get a higher yield and you will get a more potent plant.
Right, and then so can you, for our listeners, can you talk about the plant, like the weight of the plant? Does it increase the total weight of the plant itself, where it yields more product that can be cultivated and industrialized?
I would say yes. I mean, if we're going to, just have the conversation specifically about the amount of CO2 a plant can uptake, the plant is basically built of carbon. And it took me a long time of growing. I used to grow plants and I would sort of assume that the plant grew out of the soil, and that, say, if you grew a plant that when you harvested it, the wet weight of a plant was, say, 5 pounds, right? You've got a plant you've taken out of this pot and it weighs 5 pounds. I would imagine that 5 pounds would have come out of the soil, and my soil should then weigh 5 pounds less. But it didn't. And then I thought, well, most of it's probably water, right, that came out of the pot. So if you say, well, the plant weighs 5 pounds wet weight, you say, well, maybe 4 pounds of that's water. And there's a pound of stem and leaf and all that stuff, right? So that's about right. You say, okay, well, a lot of it's water, and then we've got some cellulose matter left over. Well, it doesn't work like that. And it took me a long time to get there, like 20 or 30 years, to actually just conceptually understand that probably of the dry matter of any plant that you take out of the ground and weigh, right? Spinach, sage, apples, most of that plant is carbon, and that carbon came out of the atmosphere, not out of the soil. It's easy to think that the plant is digesting the soil and building this structure out of it. It's not. The plant is building up the structure from CO2 molecules in the atmosphere. And then it's using some building blocks of micronutrients out of the soil and some water. So if we get the CO2 uptake of the plant, carbon dioxide going into the plant, more effective, you do, to answer your question, end up with a heavier and bigger plant with more yield, and you can produce more as you bring more, and sort of sequestering carbon is what it's doing. You're taking carbon out of the atmosphere and bringing it into the plant and building the plant. So yes, short answer is you're right.
Okay. And then let me ask you a question. As you talk about the soil itself, did you make any enhancements to the soil, adding any nitrates or anything, any type of fertilizer to the soil?
No, not at all. No, the soil is the soil, and there's a lot of science behind the soils. A lot of people have spent their lifetimes understanding how to build soil, what's in the soil. I think a lot of the stuff nowadays, when I was young, we talked about fertilizing the soil. And there's a lot of people still have the idea that you fertilize soil, but feeding the soil is actually the best approach. You don't fertilize it into the soil. You feed the soil, and when you feed the soil, what you're doing is you're putting elements into the soil that that feed the mycorrhizosphere. And if you feed the mycorrhizomes are what are interfacing with the roots. But that's a technology that's well taken care of. That's really out of my wheelhouse. We're just dealing with air movement above the ground. We work with the snap fan line is working with what's happening above the ground, how we can move air through the canopy, get rid of dead zones, wick moisture away from the plants, and give them a richer carbon environment to live in. And on the FogCO side, we can adjust the humidity. And there's a thing called a vapor pressure differential that if you change the humidity levels, you can adjust how fast the plant brings in nutrients through its roots or not. And then we also have a way of scrubbing off the smell that might be leaving a facility, because there's airborne elements, right? Volatile organics coming out, and we can neutralize those so people down the street can't smell them.
And as you talk about the facility itself, what is the ideal square footage for a facility for a controlled grow?
The ideal square footage for a grow?
Yes.
Well, I think that depends on for how many people, you know. For one person, you could probably use a 4x6 or 4x4.
Okay.
You know, if you had, and then if you got a whole family, you might need a few more. But it depends if you're trying to what you're trying to do. If you're in a state and you're trying to provide for yourself and your family or your friends, you know, a little bit of medicine, then you can use state guidelines for the number of plants that you can grow without a permit, and that would serve most people's needs very well.
Okay, and then the time frame for that grow, for the process that you perfected, has the time frame increased or decreased as far as the standard time for grow? Was it 3 months, 4 months?
It's the same. That's down really to the plant's biorhythm, and the amount of time that it takes to harvest a crop really depends on a couple of factors. The flower cycle of a cannabis plant is 2 months. And the growth cycle of a plant is dependent on the photo availability of light, right? So what happens is the plants know they've got two functions basically. They're either in grow mode or flower mode. That's their two things they do in life. They grow and then they flower. So what happens is when the light is more than 12 hours in a day, they grow. And when the light is 12 hours or less in a day, they flower. So that's because that's how the seasons on the planet work. And the plants have adapted to the seasons. So they evolved in the steppes of Afghanistan, and they would at the end of the cycle, at the end of the year, the boys and the girls would have exchanged some pollen from a boy plant, it gone over to a girl plant, it would have gone into it, and it would have formed seeds. The girl would have made a bunch of seed pods. At the end of the year, it would get very, very dry, and the plant would have basically withered, wilted, and died. The seed pods will have fallen to the ground and been dormant in the ground. The rains would come, and they would be washed into a crevice or a crack somewhere, and they would sit. These plants are perennials. They're not annuals. So every year they have to start a new life. So the seeds go down in the ground. All winter time, the days are short, and the seeds sit there. And then the sun starts coming out, and it starts getting warm again. And January, February-ish time, the light would increase, the warmth would increase. Then the plants would germinate. They stick out a little root, and they start figuring out which way's up and down, and the root gets into the soil. They stick up a little sprout, and then the days are getting longer, and the plant starts growing. So the plants, it's like 13 hours of light a day, 14 hours of light a day, 15 hours of light a day, 16 hours of light a day. The plant just goes to town growing. At that point, it's just a stalk and a bunch of leaves, right? And then it takes, from a seedling, it takes 2 months for them to quote unquote sex. So the plants have got boy plants and girl plants. When they're young, nowadays you can buy pre-sex seeds, but typically you don't know whether they're going to be boys or girls. If you give them perfect conditions to grow, you're going to get about 50-50 boys and girls. And this is the same with plants and the same with mammals. If you stress them tremendously during their initial stages of life, not enough water, way too much cold environment, and way too much wind, you end up getting more boys than girls. That happens with all mammals, that happens with plants. So if you treat them very well, you're going to get 50-50. If you treat them bad, you might get like 70% boys, 30% girls. So that's a natural selective feature. So you imagine plants' perfect environment, 50-50 boys and girls, they start growing. And then when the light gets throughout the summer, you reach a point in the middle of the summer where it's the longest day of the year, and then it starts shortening down. And when you get to about 12 hours, which is the winter equinox, at that point, the plants are going to go into their flower mode. So when they start to flower, they take 2 months to flower. So what we're doing doesn't change any of the length of the time it takes for a plant to either do its growth phase or to do its seeding phase. Now, in modern agricultural grows, what people tend to do is they start off with a mother plant, so they don't grow a seed, because there's a lot of unknowns. They start off with a mother plant of a known genetics that's been cut from a plant that you like the way that it grew. They take that, they grow that for a little while at 18 hours, and when they want it to flower, they bring it down to 12 hours, they put it through its flower cycle, and then they harvest it. But when we're just talking about how to effectively look after the plant's respiration, sort of its breathing, if you would.
Okay. One other question. I'm sorry for asking all the questions. Do you feel artificial light over solar lighting is better?
Well, that's a big question, and better for who? The plant or us, Ultimately, I don't think the plant necessarily knows. I think if you're saying better as far as if you're trying to get like AAA grade, the best product that will support the highest price and is the most dense with CO2, and then dense with chlorophylls, and then dense with the ability to produce the highest quantity and quality of THC, I think you're going to find that in lights. And that's basically comes down to a mathematical function. With the sun, you've got 1,000 watts per square meter of light from the sun at the equator at midday. That's how they figured out what a meter is. A meter is like, we call it 3.3 feet basically in our math in American, right? But the European German technology is a meter is 1 meter square. There is 1,000 watts of light of it. So that's the basis of all of how we figure this stuff out. And so if you have a plant you put inside of 1 meter of area, 3 feet by 3 feet, from the sun, there's 1,000 watts available of light. Whereas if you're growing in a modern indoor facility, you can saturate the ground with more than 1,000 watts of light for a 1 meter square. And you can get the spectrum tailor-made so that it's more light indoors available for the plant than there is outdoors. So therefore, you're going to get more light equals more product. So when you say better, you will get a better product. But the light that's been produced is electricity, and that electricity is produced using something, mostly nuclear fuel or coal or oil or hydroelectric. So if you put stuff in the sun, it doesn't mess with the environment as much as if you grow it indoors.
Understood. And that's so important for the planet itself.
Right. I mean, if we want to sit aside and smoke the best stuff and don't care what happens to the planet, that's one way. But also, it may not be quite as potent, but we instead of doing 1 toke, we could do 2 and smoke stuff from outdoors, and it'd be fine.
Wonderful. That's some great information. Nate, you got anything?
Well, for example, I might be wrong on some of this, but the company itself has been around for about 30 years, correct?
Yes.
And you guys do things from greenhouse, paper mills, printing, textiles for your humidification. But aside from that, we're talking what? Humidifiers, fog cannons. Your company has so many different things that could help in many fields. But
Yes.
particularly in the cannabis, what's the most important there? You need to have the humidifiers correct. The fog cannons come into play for you guys.
The fog cannons tend to be more for outdoor, like industrial applications for knocking down dust and stuff like that. But we do have a thing called a revolution, which is a hanging fan, which allows to change the humidity. So there's a thing called crop steering, which is a way of adjusting how much nutrients the plant uptakes. And the way you can crop steer is by effectively being in charge of the humidity. So if you imagine a wick, like say if you take a wick, right, and you dip it in some oil and you light one end of it, right, it burns. And the way that it's burning is it's pulling the oil up through the strands of the wick. It's burning on the other end, right? And that's called the action of capillary. You get a very small space, fluid moves up it. And that's how water and stuff gets up trees too, is the capillary action. Have you seen like if you take two pieces of glass, right, and you stick them very close to each other? And then if you dip them down into some water, the water is going to go up between the two pieces of glass. Have you ever seen that happen? Okay. So that's the action of capillary. We have two objects close together, and you can suck something up the center. Right? So that's capillary action. The plants operate pretty well similarly in that they have these very thin channels going up the plant. So at one end of the plant, you've got the root, and at the other end of the plant, you've got the leaf. And underneath the leaf, you've got these little stomatas. A stomata is an opening, it's an orifice. A mouth is a stoma. So on a human being, we've got eyes and mouths, amongst other things we don't talk about. But these open and close intentionally, right? On a plant, they've got stomatas. The plant stomata on the bottom of the leaf is a microscopic pore. The plant can open and close intentionally. It does that using these things called guard cells. So when it's open, it's the plant is sort of in business. When it's open, CO2s are going in, hydrogens and oxygens are coming out. The CO2 is going in, then allow the plants to create complex sugars and carbohydrates in function and using chlorophyll. But when the plant is operational and the CO2s are coming out of the pore on the leaf on one end, well, something has to go in for it to come out. So when that moisture comes out through the leaf, it comes in under the ground, in through the roots. And it's coming up through the action of capillary and then out. So it's a flow going on. You've got moisture coming in through the root, up through the stem, out through the leaf. In through the root, up through the stem, out through the leaf. Now, down in the soil is fertilizer, right? Which we put in, or food. Really, it's food that we put in to feed the microrhizomes. The microrhizomes are passing sugars and doing trades with the plant, and it's coming out through the leaf. Now, if you want to affect the amount of fertilizer the plant is uptaking, you can do that by increasing the humidity upstairs where the leaves are, because the moisture is leaving the plant through the stomatas. And if you increase the humidity, so the humidity rate gets to the point at which the vapor pressure differential is equal, the plant will not be able to put moisture out through the leaf. Therefore, it will not be able to absorb moisture through the root. Therefore, the fertilizer will not go in. So you can adjust how fast the plant is revving. You think of it as an engine. The throttle on your engine, you push it and the engine revs up. You take it off, it revs down. With the plants, we can adjust how fast the plant metabolizes and revs by the amount of moisture in the room, and we do that by changing the vapor pressure differential by increasing or decreasing the humidity, and that's called crop steering.
Now, of course, this is vital to the whole process, and we know that. And of course, I know you're an expert on that, so you fully know. How many times have you seen people have to backtrack after the fact because they haven't done their research to get everything in place? They destroyed their crop, and then they have to go start all back over again. So how vital is it to do your research and start from the beginning properly and reach out to individuals like you to make sure this process is done correct the first time?
Well, I think it depends. Nowadays when people are investing into these very high-tech modern indoors, it's vital to get it right in the very, very beginning. If a person is just putting a couple of plants in their backyard, you never need to think about this because nature takes care of all of that. There's a couple of really 3 different ways of growing plants. One is you grow them in your backyard, right? So you've got like celery or chard or cannabis. You just put it outside, and nature takes care of it. There's always air movement. There's a lot of stuff going on outside. Then the next level is to put it in a greenhouse, where you put a roof over it. It protects you from the wind, the snow, but that's beginning to do what we call controlled environment. So greenhouse, you've got a little bit more work to do to keep your plants healthy in a greenhouse. But then when you put your plants in an indoor, where you recirculate the air through the indoor, you don't use the outdoor air, and you have a completely controlled environment, that's when it's really important to look after everything, because when it's outdoors, nature takes care of it. When you put it indoors, we have to become nature. We take care of it. So it's our responsibility then to do that. And if you don't, your yield's going to go down. The plant's yellow. They're unhappy. They're unhealthy, and the profitability, the bottom line at that point would be upside down, and people would just be losing money.
And that's where too much moisture can cause molding on the plant.
Too much moisture can definitely cause molding, and it could powdery mildew and a lot of problems. So yeah, keeping the moisture content's really important.
Another thing I think your company does too is like odor control. And of course, we need to know about the plant and its proper odor, but how can odor control do anything inside of that greenhouse as well? Or is that not something to focus on quite as much?
Well, we don't do the odor inside. We do the odor outside. So where the exhaust fans are coming out, when there's the fans, say on a commercial greenhouse, they will start up when it gets too warm, and they will blow the air out of one end, and they'll suck the air in the other end. So when we're exhausting warm air that's sort of spent, so the plant's absorbed a bunch of CO2 out of it, there's a bunch of moisture in it, and it's sort of hot, we're going to blow that out, and there would be a lot of scent in that air. And that scent that's coming out in that air can be offensive to some people, and there's an odor. And also a lot of people have respiratory problems from it and stuff, So what we do is we put a thing called a misting ring where the fan is, and the misting ring is a circle with a bunch of little orifices in it with these nozzles, and then we apply over 1,000 psi of pressured water, and what comes out as a fog. But look, it is actually it's fog. You see fog outside, it's truly fog. It's not mist. It's not wet. There's nothing on the ground. It's completely fog, and within that fog, we inject a product, a Cannabis product, which then erodes the volatile organic oil compound in there, joins those molecules, and neutralizes it so that there's no smell. It doesn't mask it. We're not like putting a Band-Aid on the problem, but we're actually taking the molecule itself is oxidizing, which is like, you have metal and it rusts, it oxidizes. So you can have a piece of metal that's really big and really strong. If you leave it in salt water or outside for long enough, it crumbles, right? So it breaks down into its molecular structure. That's oxidization, and we oxidize the terps that have the volatile organic compound, which is the THC, which is what you would smoke. But there's particles of that coming out that you can smell, so we can neutralize that through the system we use.
Now, the greenhouses, of course, that's what we all know. That's what we're used to.
Yes.
But with the pods now coming available in terms of, we've seen those multiple places, kind of the shipping containers. Is there, what you've seen in your research, big difference between the two? What's the best for the individuals? And does it all depend on the amount of space they have and what they're trying to grow, the amount they're trying to grow?
I think so. I don't think it really matters too much the space. I think it matters on what you're trying to do. I mean, is it for recreational use, medicinal use for a family member, or is it something where there's a co-op and there's a group of people coming together and they're trying to do, like pool their energies together and have a little bit of a bigger facility? Or is it for profit? And if it's a for profit and a person has a permit for a certain amount of space, that changes. And then if it's an operator that has multiple permits, like the person might have 10 permits, then it changes. So it's sort of an economy of scale. But I think you could grow. I think if we just look at it at a plant level, I think you could grow one plant to the same specifications in a controlled environment in, say, someone's home, or in their garage. You could grow exactly the same plant to the same specifications as you could grow in the most sophisticated indoor in the world. The only difference would be in your garage. Of course, you'd have to have a lot of pipes and tubes, and you'd have to have your humidification right and your soil right, and you'd be monitoring all of these things, and you really know what you're doing. But you'd be growing one plant, and there's no difference between growing one. It's a lot harder to grow 1,000 of them or 10,000 of them. But that's what they're doing in these big operations. Is you do one thing, and then you do 10 things, and you do 100 things, and you do 1,000 things, and you just get it right. Just scale it up.
Right. One thing we got to definitely make sure everybody keeps in mind is we're talking about these different ways to grow the greenhouse, which is important. But we also have to remember, not every state has this where it's legal yet. So we don't want people to overstep and do something that their state's not allowing at this time.
Well, people need to be very cognizant of what they can do in their state, and if they've got ability to have recreational use in their state, that's something they can do. Or, and if it's legal in their state to purchase, they can purchase from a legal dispensary. Yep.
Absolutely, because there's so much going on in this business, as we've discussed, and people know a lot of things are changing. But then again, not everything's quite there yet. Like we just noticed the other day, and I forgot what state it was, honestly. I think it's Pennsylvania. They now have it set up where you can now cross over the state line from another area if you buy in a different state and come back to Pennsylvania.
Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, is that what they call intrastate trade or something?
For them right now, just their neighboring states, yes.
Okay.
But we're hoping that's something that's going to expand over this year throughout multiple states, because we've seen, for example, you can go into New York and buy, but you can't cross back into New Jersey. So you got to be careful about that.
Yeah, that's a little out of my wheelhouse, but I'm sure that's super helpful for some people. Yeah.
No, absolutely. We'd love to see that in all the states, but that's why we try to make a cognizant effort every time to say, hey, make sure, please keep an eye on your laws. We don't want anybody trying to do what's best for themselves medicinally and then get caught because they want to plead ignorant. We have these devices that can look up most all the information for us.
Yeah. And if people are in a state that's legal and it's legal to grow, and if it's something that they're interested in doing for themselves, if they're in a situation where they've got some back pain or whatever and they need some medicine, they can definitely, or, if it's legal there for recreation, that there's ways of people can empower themselves. They can grow plants, and it's relatively easy, and they might not be as powerful as a strain that they might be able to buy in a dispensary, but it's sort of like homegrown can be looking at like homebrew beer.
Right.
Like if a person wants a specialized, very, very good quality whiskey, you can't make that at home. You want a beautiful distilled vodka, you go and you buy that. But people do make wine at home, and people do make beer at home, and it's craft beers, and people are able to do craft growing for themselves at home. If they want, it's not going to be necessarily as powerful as what they might be able to buy at a dispensary. But if it's legal in their state, and if they take it upon themselves to do some due diligence, they might have to, like if you want to say whiskey, if it's like 50% alcohol, and beer's 5% alcohol, well, you just need to drink 5 times as much beer to have the same effect as whiskey, So that's why whiskey comes in small glasses and beer comes in big bottles, So the person's like, oh, well, I have 3 beers and I've got a buzz. Well, you go, okay, so that's 36 ounces of beer. Well, how much whiskey do you need to get the same buzz? Not very much. You can have 2 shots of whiskey gives you the same buzz. Well, same thing is true of distillates. If a person's like, well, I like to vape cannabis, but that's going to cost me $35, $40 to buy that. They could grow the same stuff at home, and maybe they'd have to smoke a little bit more, but they could have the same effect.
And of course, every scenario, every instance is different. From what you've seen, because you definitely have the knowledge on this, for the most part, and again, it depends on the amount of space they want, what they want to do, how many plants. typically, what's the average startup cost for people who want to look into this?
Well, I think that would depend a little bit where they are in the country and sort of what they're trying to do. If for instance, someone was in a situation where they were like, oh, well, look, I'm going to try growing, say, 4 plants. And if it's legal in their state to say, grow 6 plants, my advice to start off would be to go and buy the 6 plants. So you've got a couple of extras. And the same would be true if I was trying to tell them how to grow a tomato. You know, you go down to the store, you want to grow 4 tomatoes, buy a couple of extra, you know, if the slugs eat one or you have a problem, get an extra. So you go to the store, you know, and there's places that will sell clones, and you figure out what type of product you want, you know, so you choose the variety you want. Same with tomatoes, you know, so you don't have to all be the same. Person could say, well, look, I'm gonna try growing 4 plants, so I'm gonna try 2 different varieties. I'm going to get 3 plants of this variety and 3 plants of that variety. So, you know, probably $20 a plant would get you some plants to start with. So there you're at, you know, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, $120 for some plants. And then you've got to take them home and figure out when you bought them, if they are typically they're in growth mode when you buy them. So they've been given 18 hours of light a day or more. You know, you're 18, so you don't want, if you buy these things in February somewhere and you've got like 11 and a half, 12 hours of light a day, the earth is sort of a curve, and as it wobbles on its axis, we get different amounts of light on the planet, and that gives us our seasons of winter and summer. We talked about this earlier on. So when you go and buy a plant and come out, it's on 18 hours. You can't take it home and take it outside, because even though it's spring, it will think it's winter because it doesn't know, right? So you go buy yourself a plant, take it home. You need a supplemental light, and you can buy a full spectrum, very inexpensive light for like probably $25. And if you're going to put your plant, say, outside, which is what I would do, buy a little greenhouse. It's your cost. Build a little greenhouse with some plastic, or buy a small greenhouse for, I would say, under $200. You could put something together. And then you would put, if it's going to be cold weather, you put a heater in there, like a little heater, and then you put a light with a timer. And you just give the plants a little extra light in the morning and a little extra light in the evening to lengthen their day, so they stay at 18 hours, so they don't just go into flower mode. And then transplant them into a bigger pot. So at that point, you've got, say, I would say for $500, you could grow 4 plants very successfully and probably yield, with a little work the first year, definitely, I would say between half a pound and a pound. If you could get a quarter pound a plant, you'd be doing okay. And once they've grown up, if you had a place where you have summers where it's fairly hot, once you've got through the springtime, you could take the plants out of the small greenhouse and just put them into pots in your yard, and you could grow them full term out in your yard. I think there might be some need to shield them from sight from your neighbors. I think it's part of it, so you'd have to make sure you have a fence or something. If you didn't, you could put them in a greenhouse with plastic, and there's a way of doing obscuring the glass in plastic by the thing called remay you can put on the inside to shield it. But you know, I think for $100 to $150 a plant, a person could grow a plant, and they could get probably, if they spent $100 on a plant, they could probably harvest $600 or $700. What would cost them $600 or $700 to buy?
Okay.
So what do you think you've seen so far? People have told you after the fact the biggest mistake they've made. Is it not having the space, not having the proper time to be able to cultivate these plants, or is it something else?
Oh, there's a lot of things. I mean, I think anyone who's a gardener who knows about gardening would be able to have a pretty easy go at this. But if a person has never gardened, I mean, maybe they're great at mechanics and great at making homebrew, but they've never grown a plant ever, they're going to have all the same problems that they would have growing any plant. I mean, cannabis is a plant. That's all it is. They called it weed for years because it's just a weed, you know. But but the biggest problem, overwatering. I think a lot of people they think that they need to look after their plants, and they keep watering them, and their roots areas get very, very wet. There's a thing called dampening off. So, you know, overwatering. Most people overwater. So one way to deal with that is to figure out how heavy the plants are. You lift them up. You don't water by moisture content and things like that. You want to wait until the plant gets pretty dry and then re-water it. But there's books on this. People could just buy a very simple gardening book, and it doesn't have to be cannabis either. Just how to grow any plant.
So for somebody like me, this is not something I need to look into because I'm going to destroy more than I'm going to grow.
It depends where your passion is at. If you really wanted to learn how to grow, there's a lot of benefits to growing, and it's very rewarding. But yeah, if you know that you're not a green thumb and you're going to kill your plants, you might just want to just go. It's sort of like if you want to go to the supermarket and buy your tomatoes or your strawberries, that might be a better use of your time.
Right, that would be me. I can keep a normal weed alive, but when we go into other plants, I'm not going to keep them alive.
Okay.
So we got a few moments left. We're going to also do some things with you later, put some of your information on our website so people can reach out to you if they've got more questions, and hopefully also get the products from you. We want to touch on a few things that are happening across the nation and get some of your input as well.
Sure.
So, for example, Connecticut joined most of the New England neighbors in allowing the sale of cannabis this past week. It kicked off actually on January 10th at 10 a.m. The sales totaled for the first day $250,000. That leaves New Hampshire as one of the only states without a legal market from Maine to New Jersey. How important is that?
I don't know. I just work as try doing the science, stay out of the politics of it. It looks to me as though, the change is happening.
Right.
And it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of dollars and cents. And ultimately, at one point, there was a prohibition on alcohol, and that there is no longer a prohibition on alcohol. It's a controlled substance, controlled by ATF. But at some point, every state will be legal. At some point, I think a lot of the hoopla of this will disappear. I think that this green rush at some point will sort of subside, and similar to alcohol, the people will know sort of what's happening with it, and it will just be fairly normal.
Well, one of the great things, Michigan actually, one of their dispensaries for the holidays did a Joints for Jackets program where you brought jackets to give to kids and homeless, and they were actually giving out joints. And I love that. I thought it was a great way that not only, yes, let's admit it, they're promoting their business, which they should, good for them, but they're helping the community, which we've seen how much this helps the community, medicinally and otherwise.
Yeah, well, it's definitely good for the economy. I think that at some point, giving back is a really important thing. There's a lot of people give back, and I think that, hopefully the cannabis will stay with that. I know a lot of the apparel companies give back. People like Paul Newman's foundation,
right?
When he was alive, he created the Numino, and then all these cookies, and they've got his wife have a beautiful line of products, and they give back. So yeah, I think it's really important for people to give back to the community.
Well, I don't know if you had heard or not, but Major League Baseball actually signed a deal with a cannabis company out of Charlotte to where they can start in certain markets, and I don't know who yet, probably Detroit and some of those places, New York. They're going to be able to actually tie in MLB with the advertisement of this product. Yeah,
makes sense. It's something that's just the same as Coca-Cola, really, right? It's a product.
Right.
It's a consumer durable product.
Yep. And speaking of Detroit, they allowed adult use this month. 33 applications were given licenses, and further rounds of licensing is expecting in the future for the dispensaries and the retail stores in Detroit.
Yeah, that's great news for people. I think that people have been using this product for a very long time. When I say a very long time, I'm sure the people in Afghanistan. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Afghanistan. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Colombia. There's stuff down in Colombia. They call it squat, which is a leaf off of a plant that they chew, and they sort of put it in their mouth with some lime. And they've been using that for thousands of years. That's one of their medicinal plants, And then we call it coca. and Coca-Cola used to put it in their products, and then
Right.
but there's stuff out there like that, and there's other products that came out, and this is just one of those products. It's been used for a long time, and there's been a prohibition on its use, and at some point, it's going to be out there for people to use, and that it will probably, once it becomes completely decriminalized and once the price is reduced, I think that there'll be less family issues. People, if someone's dad is selling this stuff and gets caught, or the mom gets caught, and then they caught up in the system, it's really bad for the kids, for the people involved. So at some point, it's like if this thing can be sort of decriminalized, people are able to get the access to what they want, and the police aren't involved, the child protective services aren't involved, the prison system's not involved, and people are able to go about their everyday lives. It's going to be better for everybody.
Well, the thing is, too, we've seen how much it helps, not just medicinally. We can make clothes out of it. We've seen where they're making hempcrete. We've seen where they've made prosthetic limbs for people.
Oh, other than we're talking, most people here are getting excited about the psychotropic aspect of cannabinoids. But yeah, the hemp, the actual plant itself, all the sales. Well, I think that the American Declaration of Independence was written on paper made from hemp.
I think you're right, actually. I believe I've heard that before.
And then all of the sales and the rigging that brought the Mayflower to America were made out of hemp. And so the hemp was the strongest material until they found Manila actually was the next strongest thing out of the Philippines. Then they started making these boats. They could actually there's a thing called a Manila galleon, which is a larger Spanish galleon, and they could make the boats bigger because they had stronger fibers to be able to make stronger ropes, so they could have more larger sails and be able to control those sails. And that was when boats got bigger. But that's when they moved away from hemp. Before that, hemp was the go-to fiber of choice.
And what we're seeing that can be done with this, I think the only thing that holds us back is our own thought process and imagination. I mean, if you told me 20 years ago that this plant we're going to use to make somebody an arm or a leg that they've lost, I would have thought there's no way that could happen.
Well, it's a plastic, right? You can drive plastics from it. So really what it comes down to is we're talking about the carbon earlier on, right? So the carbon's in the environment. And carbon, I mean, when you oil is carbon also, right? So, cannabis can change, is very efficient at absorbing carbon and making that carbon into cellulose matter and into oil. So it's a great, from the hemp, right? So you sort of got on one end, we've got industrial hemp, right? And then we've got products used for CBDs, medicine, and stuff used for recreational, for THC. So it has a lot of different attributes. It can do a lot.
Absolutely. Liz, we're coming towards the end of this hour, and I thank you so much. Would love to get you back. We could probably talk to you for months on end with all of your knowledge and everything involved. Later today, we're going to put up the website on our site so that people can, reach out for more information. But real quick, if you could, mention to these people before we go about how they could reach out to you, whether it be through social media aspects, your website, or that's great to have contact with you.
Yeah, well, they can look online, at fogco.com, fogco.com. That's the company. That's SnapFan. That's the misting stuff. They can definitely look there. My name is Lucian Edisford, and my email is Lucian, Lucien, at fogco.com. I'm available to answer questions, talk to people about various different things. And if you have any applications for fogging, misting systems, or ventilation, I'd love to see if we can help you out and give you a quote.
Listen, we absolutely appreciate and love your knowledge, the information, and everything you're going to continue to do for this company.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
All right, well, we hope everybody has a great week. And listen, we hope to have you on again in the near future, because there's so much more that we could dissect and discuss in this.
I don't know much about the regulatory stuff, and that stuff I would really like to learn from you. So next time I'll be asking you questions about that.
Absolutely. No, we're one of those. If we can't find the answer, we don't know it. We're going to look and find our best so that we can pass it on to individuals such as yourself.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Nice meeting you guys. Thank you, Nate.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye then.